STEM Ecosystems on celebrating their 10-year anniversary. I'm sad not to be there. I remember 10 years ago actually hosting the start of STEM Ecosystems, the 27 original communities in the White House Conference Center, celebrating and kicking off this amazing community. And it's amazing to see the growth to now more than 120 communities, going global and continue to thrive. The thing that I reflect on when I sort of think about these 10 years is really like how much this community has grown and like how much it has accomplished, and yet the challenge ahead of us. So if I go back to just being a, sort of an early White House staffer back in early 2009, President Obama had just given a big speech on putting science in its rightful place. And half of that speech actually ended up being about math and science education. And so Jan Morrison was actually one of the early people I called. I was told like, hey, we should try to do more on this. Maybe Jan will have ideas. And she just jumped in, started to build out a list of everyone I need to call, and actually helped me organize the first White House meeting that had everyone from the Business Roundtable, the Chamber, to a number of from the NGA and others there. And then 5 months later, Jan was there when we had President Obama standing with a first robotics robot and us announcing the first major STEM initiative and the first major science initiative of the Obama White House. And that led to what ended up being an 8-year effort, our push on 100,000 math and science teachers, computer science for all, our effort to make sure we were getting a lot more math and science education into schools. And STEM ecosystems was actually one of our big areas to really say, how do we make sure this thing that Jan would say to me, which is, I feel like we're often fighting a forest fire with 1,000 eyedroppers, like that's not what coordinated action looks like. We need to be part of an actual integrated network working together. And, instead of that just being an idea, actually bringing together both donors, companies, and communities to actually do coordinated work, I think made a huge difference. And the fact that this community continued to thrive even after the Obama White House and continued to grow, I think is really important. I mean, the challenges we face today with what does AI mean for families? What do our kids need? I think these problems are bigger than ever. But instead of this being, just like the next problem, we actually have a community that's motivated to work together, that's actually working on it. So I'm sorry I can't be there, but I'm excited that you all are working on this, and you should count me as an ongoing friend and ally, and I'm excited about the next 10 years.
Please welcome to the stage our moderator, Brian Kelly, editor-at-large, U.S. News & World Report, and our panel, Jan Morrison, founder and CEO of TIES, Dave Ferrero, founder and principal at Alacris Consulting, and Steve Selesnow, Stanford DCI Fellow, former president and CEO, Arizona Community Foundation.
Thank you. Welcome to everyone. I'm very honored to be here. At U.S. News, where I was the editor in the early aughts, we were sort of in the early stages of some of these conversations, and some of the conversations that turned out to be STEM ecosystem took place on our stage, which makes me very, very pleased and in fact proud. I look around and I'm like, I can't believe you guys are still here. I had no idea this was going to scale as much as it did, and it's great to know. We've kept up our part of it. As you know, we rank STEM high schools, which is, I think, a powerful way of evaluating, and we still do convenings related to STEM and journalism related to STEM. So we're very happy to be part of what really was some of the best ideas that we heard at the time. I thank Broadcom and Paula. Those were terrific remarks, Paula. And Broadcom is, if we're doing a history, Broadcom really has been one of the spines of this. Ron Ottinger's here. Gerald Solomon wasn't. They were really great instigators in this. And it's the sustainability that I think that's been so powerful, a subject that will come up again and again. Companies and sustainability on this issue are a critical resource. I'm pleased to be with some of the OGs of STEM. Yeah. If you don't laugh, you probably are actually enmeshed in STEM and don't participate in popular culture. It's a compliment. Jan is beyond an OG. She's the godmother. I mean, the praise was clear, but obviously it's very genuine. And again, the issue of people who've stuck with this and the power of that and the lessons we can learn. I think this is the opportunity here to kick this off the next few days, but take a little step back into the history of it. Understand where it started and some of the things that did and didn't work, which is always valuable, I think. And then take a little look. I want to ask these folks a little bit about trying to pitch us forward a little bit. I know there's going to be a lot more discussion of that to come. But let me start with Steve, because you were kind of early in this, yeah. and early with your hand on some of the money. You know, we never want to make a distinction between the education and the policy and the money. So I'm always looking for where, you know, follow the money as well. So Steve, with Gates Foundation and sort of a lot of the early initiative, how did we start this process?
Yeah, well, thank you. It's just I'm going back to 2005, and some of the work started before then. I had just gotten to Seattle, and I always had an interest in STEM. I opened the STEM high school. You heard Dr. Ferrero talk about McKinley Tech. We reopened that as a STEM school when I was a STEM high school, the first STEM high school in the city back in around 2002. So I was involved with it, and I got the Gates Foundation, and we were working on small high schools at the time, and STEM was part of that. And when you take a big comprehensive high school and break it into 4 smaller schools, STEM was a great option to do that. And we're also supporting just converting schools to STEM schools as well, in places where it would work. And we started in Texas. And I'd like to say it was the idea of STEM, not the money we were able to put behind it. But at the Gates Foundation, as many of you know, they have more money than God. And so you could do a lot. You had a lot of influence and power with that money. And we were able to create, Dave may remember the exact number, I think it was close to 100 STEM schools in Texas. It might have been 50 or so. We put in $25 million to create that. And we thought, you know, what if we had all these schools talking to each other? We could create a network in Texas, and we worked on doing that with Jan as a partner. And then we said, well, you know, we were always interested in scale. How could we make these networks? This was what it was called way back in those days, nearly 25 years ago. How could we do that in other states? And we went to Ohio, and we tried to do what we did in Texas, and we failed miserably because the governance structure in Ohio was very different than the governance structure in Texas. In Texas, the governor could command, you know, 100 STEM schools, and if there were money, that would happen because the governor said it would happen. In Ohio, you were bound to fail if you tried to do it that way. All change had to rise up from, I used to call them the 5 city-states of Ohio. And so we learned from that failure that you could create a STEM network and you didn't have to use the Walmart model of scaling where every single place looks the same as the last place, that there was power in difference, and that you build it around the people and the STEM resources of that state in the way that state wants to do it, and you'd have more success. So that's kind of how we all got started on this, thinking we could do this nationally.
Yeah, yeah. And Jen, you came in that first Texas process as well.
Yeah, I did. In fact, it was really pretty interesting because we had been working with Jim Shelton, right, who was deputy at Gates. This is right after Gates, the foundation was created, and trying to put some schools in Baltimore in the small high school program. Right. And I had gone on vacation to Cape Cod, as we always do, in August, and got a call from Jim Shelton, and he said, "What do you know about Texas?" And I said, "Great barbecue." And he said, "Well, I think you should get to Texas." And I said, "Okay." So, you know, I was in Cape Cod. He said, "No, tomorrow." So I said to my family, "I'm going to go have good barbecue. I have no idea what I'm doing." And I flew to Austin And that was the first of and heard the story about Governor Perry and about Tom Vander Ark, who was the director. And the two of them have hatched together this idea after a semiconductor conference that STEM was a thing for Texas to do. I mean, maybe you remember more of it.
Tom got the idea from the governor, and Tom came back and said, you do this in Texas. And I went to Dave and said, Dave, help us get this done. So that's kind of how it worked.
Yeah, so Dave, to pick up from there, yeah.
To me, Texas is prehistory, right? In fact, when I think about the origins of the STEM networks, the gay STEM networks, I actually forget that it started in Texas. So I was the Ohio program officer at the time. And so what Steve actually said was, we want to do this in Ohio, get it done, right? So that was sort of the beginning of that sort of model of STEM networking. Was in that 5-city state mix that Steve was talking about. What more would you like me to elaborate on?
Well, how it transitioned. So I appreciate the brutal honesty here. Good, large failure, large expensive failure. But obviously we learned, part of the lesson is to learn from our failures. How did you pick up from there?
So yeah, I'll tell a story that kind of fleshes out what Steve said about it failing miserably. So we sent a group of delegates from Ohio down to Texas to sort of learn from the Texas High School Project how they got it done. And it was a mix of like the Business Roundtable group and one of the major funders there, and I think a couple of like higher ed people and school reform people. And about a half dozen or so went down, and I think we sponsored them.
You paid for it.
Yeah. And
we did it.
Okay. Were you there?
Oh, wow.
Okay. So Jan will be able to flesh out even further. It happened on Tuesday, or let's say, right? I come into work Wednesday and I get a call from the head of the Texas High School Project. He goes, yeah, Dave, those Ohio people, he goes, they couldn't agree on the time of day. They started squabbling in the meeting and they had like none of their ducks in a row. And the people in Texas were just like, I don't know what to do here.
Right.
So
that story continues. And I think this is really important, Brian. Yeah. Because you talk about when something fails and you're just going to keep doing it. Ohio had to work. There was no question that Ohio had to work. And there are gatekeepers, like we all know. Ohio, out there, right? Lots of us are there, right? We know. And we said, this idea of a field trip is a good idea. And how about if we rethink this field trip? And we did with Rich Stoff, who was the head of the Business Roundtable. I think that's right. Right. And we decided we would go to High Tech High in California and go visit out there and visit Larry. And then we would go to Denver Science School for Science and Technology, DSST. And we would take a cross-sector group. We were going to take all those city-states and representation. And we were going to take the people from the legislature who were, at this point, very vocal about the fact that STEM was not really for all their populace. Right, Steve? I think they were worried about that.
Yeah, it was, she's now Congresswoman Joyce Beatty, who said to me in a meeting in Columbus, I haven't seen a STEM school that serves children of color. You show me a STEM school that does that, and then maybe I'll support it. And so we took her to McKinley and these other places, and she came back moved by what she saw and made an impassioned statement on the floor of the House in Ohio about the need for Ohio to engage and support the growth of STEM networks in the state of Ohio. And I think, learning from her, what did she need to see in order for her to put her endorsement behind it? What did the Business Roundtable need to see? And I remember after that first trip to Texas with a small subset, the head of that delegation from Ohio, kind of stomped his foot and pounded his fist, and he said, I'm sick of Texas. We're not doing it the Texas way in Ohio. We're doing it the Ohio way. And again, I emphasize that it was the the power of people saying, we want to do this, but we will do it our way. We will learn from others. We will see if you can reach kids of color. We'll see if what you do, and then we'll take it back to Ohio and do it the way we think it needs to be done for our children. And I think that led us in our thinking in terms of how we worked with other states. And so, you know, your early successes, you know, breed your future, your early failures breed your future successes. And so learning from that, when we went to places like New York to see if they wanted to do a STEM network in North Carolina and California and Washington, the idea was, who are the science and tech and engineering and math resources in your state? Who are the ones willing to own this and then advocate for it? And how do you want to do it that you think is best in your state? And then us coming in with saying, okay, we get your vision, here's now the money for you to do it, instead of leading with the money first with our idea, but bringing the money behind the states and their designs and their ideas.
Pull out some fundamental lessons where I can, and I think, Dave, you sort of highlighted this before. If you take a step back, the lessons seem to be not top-down, or maybe top-down might work for a few places, but really more of a bottom-up approach. Was that kind of the insight that came out of that? Did you realize that at the time?
You know, in the STEM work, and really in all the sort of the work that we did, right? We're a national foundation doing local work. One of the first lessons we learned is you just can't parachute into a city and say, you know, here's $10 million, do this. People, if you don't have ownership, if that ownership isn't genuine, and if people don't actually believe in the mission behind the initiative you want to do, it's not going to work. So this is true in Ohio and spades with respect to STEM, right? So yeah, it's really, I would call it more of a tension between the opportunity for support and matching that to the genuine needs of the community. Does that make any sense?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. What was a breakthrough, Jan, in terms of which I mean, regionally? Where do you think back and say, wow, that we really got the formula?
Well, I think that the fact that it wasn't a formula, that what we found out, to Dave's point, is that you have to design. You have to bring the user in, you have to design, you have to find where they are, and you have to understand exactly what success looks like. Mm-hmm. If you understand that, then you can reverse engineer, you can create the processes, but it's about the champions. And I look around the room, and Frank Creech is there. Frank from North Carolina, and Burroughs Welcome, and Sam Houston, right? Alfred May, and I can keep going, MCNC. And we wondered about how that was going to go because Research Triangle Park is such a strong force there. But it's an amazing set of ecosystems in North Carolina. Do they look like New York? Not in a million years. Because Donna DiCiotto at East Syracuse, Manoa, as superintendent of extraordinary value, figured out what that would look like in her own community. What did the southern tier look like? What did Albany look like? And to your point about the top down, remember we tried to have SUNY run the state?
Yeah.
And that didn't work so well. Right. but when we asked them, the hubs, to do it themselves, that was a beautiful thing. It was magnificent.
Okay, well, let me push you on that because it's a lovely thought, community outreach, and it's what we all want, right? But there's no formula, okay, which this is a scientific community. That should be slightly troubling. There's no formula, and there's no there to start with. What's the spark? How do you instigate the creation of these things, or is this like the birth of life, to spontaneously generate itself?
It's what Dave just said. You cannot bring the money and say, do what we want you to do. There had to be the will, and the way that it would make a difference in bringing education to workforce to economic development in whatever that unit was of geographic unit. So in some cases, it was just the city. In some cases, it was outside in a rural community.
Yeah, there were some, I think, though, kind of driving belief systems and commonality across a number of people, and I'm really trying hard to pull these things out of my memory, and I'm thinking, for Congresswoman Beatty, she had a clear vision about wanting children of color who haven't been given access to science, technology, engineering, and math, and haven't had opportunities created for them. Her aim was to make sure those opportunities were created, high-quality schools that could teach STEM. You talked to Shirley Allen, who we talked to in New York, the president of RPI, Rensselaer Polytech. She had a similar vision. And then you go to any state, every single state, there are people that really care about STEM, whether it's driven by companies that want a qualified workforce, or whether somebody has a social agenda they want to achieve in schools for all children. And so you try to tap into what those belief systems are. But what I discovered, and I think what you prove, is if there are people willing to do this, people, each of you have your visions of who you want to serve, how you want to serve them, why you want to serve them with STEM, and you can come together and form relationships that ultimately form a rich ecosystem, because you have companies engaged, and you have scientists engaged, and you have tech people engaged, and you have school people engaged. And so you build around those belief systems, like we need to do this, one, in our community, two, in our state, and what if we can build out this ecosystem we know that's there, but we need to flesh it out and we need to connect it to each other. All these beliefs can drive the kind of change in the development of what's now emerged to these 120, 140 ecosystems around the country.
So you're giving us a sense of who's at the table, but I'm interested in sort of who's at the head of the table, or maybe whose table is it? So I've had the privilege of appearing at a number of STEM ecosystems over the years. One of my favorites is Lancaster, Pennsylvania. Is anybody from Lancaster here? I've spoken there a couple times, and it's wonderful. Just not too far up the road.
They're the people at the table.
They're the people at the table. But the spine is a local community foundation.
It is.
That has kind of pulled people together. That somebody's got to rent the space. Somebody's got to, and I really admire what they've done there in terms of sustainability. But also there is a continuity. How does that? How do you encourage that to take place? And does it have to be a philanthropy, or who does that?
No, I don't think it has to be a philanthropy, and I think the philanthropy can help convene the interested people. But sometimes it's a corporation that's a major employer in an area. Sometimes it's a university that has very strong science, technology, and engineering programs. Sometimes it's a local school district. It really depends, as we've been saying. It can be different in every place. It's who are those resources, and who can bring the convening power to the table. And when we were doing this, and I'll say this as nearly 30 years, I started as a classroom teacher and as a principal, and then as a superintendent. So I'm district oriented, but I support great schools for kids, whoever runs them. And I learned, spending years in really large bureaucracies in this region, in this area, in this city and the county northwest of this, that sometimes when you go first to either the state superintendent or to the superintendent, you will be bounded by the edges and the requirements of the bureaucracy that drives those schools. And those of you who work in schools know exactly what I mean. And we didn't want that driving the potential opportunities of STEM. So what we did, and I got beat up pretty badly by the state superintendent, and I'm going back to Ohio again, where all this started, because I didn't invite her to the early meetings. In fact, I intentionally kept her out, not because she wasn't a great person or qualified, but I know if we started with the State Department of Education, we wouldn't get the innovation we would have gotten by having the CEO of the Ohio, Rich Stoff, the Ohio Business Roundtable, and the CEO of Nationwide Insurance, and who were people who had influence and power and knowledge that we needed to help design it first, Battelle Industries, and help us design it first, and then go to the State Department and say, listen, here's what we want to do. Now, how can we help bring people in who can speak to the ownership, maybe that's not the right word, the ownership of the idea that STEM is important in the state, and we as businesses or higher ed or wherever we start can help lead the way to bring in educators who can get it done and can tell us how things can get done without being bounded by other factors.
David, do you see instances of the education bureaucracy being a roadblock?
Always. It can't help itself. You know, in the work that we did back in the day, our most successful and interesting and innovative initiatives tended to be generated and led outside of the existing institutional structures, public education structures. Inside, they tended to get chewed up, right? So we had to make sure there was a balance of power such that the external parties were able to sort of overcome, I suppose, and short circuit some of those bureaucratic tendencies to sort of clamp things down. And I want to emphasize that it's not that any of the individuals inside those institutions have any desire to do that. It's just it's just a requirement of their role, right? They just have, you know. And so you need to, as Steve is saying, you really need to, you know, they need to be there because you need the support of the state apparatus, but they can't run it. It's just they're not built for it.
Yeah. So we've got a little more time, and then we're going to turn to some questions. So please consider some thoughts for these guys. But I want to kind of pitch forward a little bit now. I can't not ask you. You know, here we are. This is evidence of having done very well, but I think in conversations we've had and others, not well enough. Right? Nobody's satisfied with where we are. I don't think. Anybody satisfied with where we are? No, I guess. Okay. So that's a given. So, you know, what's the next, what do we need next? Is it more STEM, initiatives like more individual regional places? And if so, how do you scale that? Or do you have another way we want to go?
So what has gone unsaid, I think, and needs to be said, is this was a build operation. There was infrastructure that was developed, the girders in place that were welded, hardwired for sustainability and endurance. And that's the 10-year that's here, is that those infrastructures, regardless of what we call them, were always cross-sector. And we recognized in the 2015 document, STEM Learning is Everywhere, from the National Academy, that it was that grassroots, but it had to have that infrastructure, and it was that. So now when you fast forward, do we build more infrastructure that stands in silos? Absolutely not. That's our biggest enemy at the moment, is the fact that we go out alone. One of the tenets of engineering that I learned from an engineer, from Rich Rosen, from day one, was that you cannot go out alone. And when we named TIES, it wasn't by mistake we called it TIES. The idea is that we are better and there's power in the collective. And so what the future looks like is to take the foundation, as Paula just gave us that call to action, and where we are, understand it with real honesty and transparency, and continue to build on what is there. And the idea that in any kind of STEM problem to solve, you iterate. You know, engineering leads us. We iterate, and we get to solving the problem, but we have to have the clarity.
So if this is STEM 2.0, and next is STEM 3.0, right? David, what's STEM 3.0?
God, I'm probably the least qualified person in the room to answer that question. It's all going to be
That's what we're doing on Wednesday.
Naomi.
Okay. So that your answer is show up on Wednesday. That's okay. It's a good answer.
I have a couple thoughts about that.
Yeah.
And I want to clarify something. I felt, state departments of education seek uniformity. They're compliance units, generally speaking. And that was one of the reasons we didn't want to work with them at first. I want to clarify, that wasn't some other nefarious motive, is that we weren't seeking uniformity. We were seeking the opposite. We were seeking idiosyncrasy, difference, that you could build ecosystems, you could build, in our language, networks, and each network could be different, but they could achieve the same outcomes for students, and they could achieve the same STEM ideals, but be very different organizations based on the people who develop them and network them in their states. I think right now advocacy, I think Paula alluded to it, I'm going to go a little stronger. If we in this room, the power of this room, and all of you in all your states, do not assert your belief system about kids and learning and STEM and the funding STEM needs. We have seen science defunded. We're not talking about defunding the police, we're talking about defunding science. We're seeing it, it's happening, it's a fact. It's not a political statement, it's being defunded. You can't separate STEM from science. And so you, as advocates in your communities, and leaders in your communities, you all have voice, you need to use it, and you need to use it where you are, and I think that's part of STEM Point 3, to advocate for the funding that is necessary to keep you growing and expanding your ecosystems and touching more and more kids who are benefiting from what you do. And if you don't, and if you're silent about what you see happening in your state about what's being defunded in education and what's being defunded in STEM, and when you get told that, we can no longer support your program anymore because we don't have the funding, you got to stand up and you got to fight for that. You're a powerful, effective voice. So I think that's clearly necessary. And the other thing is to go back to the network idea and the ecosystem. Ecosystems can talk to each other. So the more you can learn from each other in all the different states. Obviously, there's a lot going on in Alabama. I'd be heading to Alabama and see how is that happening? That's pretty effective. But looking at how you can scale with each other and how you can unify your voices and learn about what's working in those places and really strengthening across ecosystems.
David and then Jan.
Yeah, I do have an answer for you on the 3.0 question. One of the things I think we learned over the last 20 years with STEM initiatives is if you lean too hard into the voc ed part of it, right, that we need to produce more computer engineers or we need to produce more coders or whatnot, you fall prey to the sort of the vicissitudes of the labor market, right? And you end up with a lot of blowback and a lot of loss of credibility if you go out there telling the world we need to populate the planet with more coders, and then AI comes along and they're all out of jobs, right? If there's a STEM 3.0, I think it's a STEM 3.0 that leans more heavily into the skills, knowledge, and habits of mind that go into being a STEM creative or an innovator, right? There are the kinds of skills of adaptivity, of flexibility, problem solving, creativity, et cetera, those are really what are valuable in STEM education. It's not whether a certain kid goes on to major in biotech in Ohio State or something. Yeah. It's about those underlying skills and dispositions. And if we could make that the driver, I think that you have an infinite horizon for that kind of
That's good. That addresses the AI question I wanted to ask. It's not your uncle's STEM, right?
Right.
No.
It's not your uncle's Oldsmobile. No. Does anyone know that? No. God, no one knows any of my references. Right. Not your uncle's Oldsmobile. It was a great advertising slogan. Sold a lot of Oldsmobiles. Jen, you were going to make a point on that.
Yeah, I also want to make a point that this is a global community, that we speak about the community of practice, and that is the collective of all the ecosystems. And it is past our own borders. And that was not something that was in the blueprint. That we didn't go to seek it, it sought out us. Yeah. And I think the power in the fact that countries, Kenya is here, Tom is here. Tom, I think, how many of these? 8 you've been to? Or maybe it is even 10. And the rest would be here but for visas. We have to understand that we need to learn from all of us. Yeah. and that regardless of the geopolitical nature of our world right now, there are children, we're all teachers, and there are communities that we can learn from and that have bearing on what we see is a future for not just the immediate, but we have to actually get to that. What does it look like in 5, 10 years? And always have our grasp on the fact that we don't have to go it alone. I think right now it feels very isolating in our world. And we look around, it is not isolating if we actually activate what we've all created.
Interesting. Picking up on your point, Steve, about advocacy. Remember when we did our first STEM conference, National STEM Conference in 2012 in Dallas, and the CEO of a very large company had a statement that stuck in my mind. He said, communities can choose to fail. The problem is evident. Communities can choose to fail by not addressing it. This is obviously a bunch of communities that have chosen to succeed. Right. But what about the communities that aren't getting that message, which raises the issue, is half of the question, half of the challenge, a marketing problem? Is it a messaging problem? I remember even in those 2012, there were a lot of companies that were very active in promoting STEM. STEM careers and TV campaigns on STEM and ad pages in magazines, which don't exist anymore. But there was a lot of corporate, particularly corporate messaging that was trying to get the message out there. You have the formula here, not the formula, sorry. You have the solution for people, but if they don't know it exists or they don't need to know, or they don't have the motivation to go there, how do you get over that hurdle?
Well, I mean, I think it's a very difficult challenge, and it's. I mean, if we were to ask everybody in this audience, how did your ecosystem form? What drove it to form? How we get that message out to others? How you can expand your ecosystem by inviting more people in. I mean, it takes a while. It takes a while to grow a tree. And if you ask me 20 years ago when we were doing this, 15 years ago, I come out at 2010 when I went to Arizona, but I funded STEM there. So if I go to 2015, 10 years ago, this didn't exist. If I go back to 2005 to the Gates Foundation, this did not exist. And you're not everybody in these ecosystems. You're a representative of your ecosystems and the people you work with. So if you think of the expansive numbers, it's just continuing to add, if you will, to add voters, to add people who have interest and inviting them into your ecosystem to make it bigger, adding more nodes to it and more pieces to it.
But Steve, to be honest, Gates decided not so much.
Yeah, well.
They decided for whatever reason, and we took a look and said, no. This has got value. And if part of that message then is the persistence, it's make that judgment on your own. If the funding disappears, which it comes and goes all the time,
well,
if you know that.
Yeah, well, I used to say to grantees who didn't like it, a diamond is forever, not a grant. and as important as it is for foundations and philanthropy to extend their timelines of funding, I mean, we were at the height of what we were doing when our funding got cut at the Gates Foundation because agendas and priorities changed. But here's the thing, your evidence that it kept growing and it kept going on, I think to your point, Jan. And I think you cannot depend on you raised a question about community foundations. Any foundations, you can't depend on the funding to last forever. And so you have to build that capacity to expand your donor base and your funding base and your support. And so you constantly have to be advocating in the funder community and in the government community, the business community, to ensure that the adequate resources are there.
We want to try to go to some questions here. Are we?
I think we have time for just one question. So I'm up here in the front with our friend and one of the earliest founders of this entire initiative, Ron.
This is so cool, first of all, and so amazing to see all of the people here who are in the room. When we started in the basement of Marriott, just wanted to highlight a couple of things quickly. First of all, the fact that you both representing the Gates Foundation at the time, took this nationally, that you put it on the map with such a thing as a state STEM initiative. I was in California at the time. I think, Dave, you were leading the California work. That made all the difference. Yeah. It opened up possibilities because you took leadership. And Brian, same for you. I mean, U.S. News and World Report, the conferences you put on, with the great work that you did, it made a difference. Now it's different players today. I would say corporations have stepped up in a big way. So private foundations are still there, but it's more corporate today than it was. And that's a huge difference in 3.0 than today. So I would ask each of you to reflect a little bit, or I would say more than that. It takes a champion. Maybe different in each state, but it takes a champion. It might be a school district in one state, it might be a university in another state, it might be an after-school network in another state. But if there isn't at least one champion, and if the funding community is not behind it, then it won't happen. Those are the two key ingredients, I would say. But I would ask you to reflect a little bit on, the leadership roles that you played and the difference that made at the time, and what lessons that might mean for all of us in 3.0.
Hey, I'm asking the questions here. Why are you getting off, Ron? Come on up. You want to? Well, I'll just say very quickly, we're journalists. I mean, we looked at it as a story, as an issue, as a problem. The thing that was really the revelation for us, going back again to 2007, 8, 9, was the jobs and the education disconnect. We were seeing, we have so many rankings, education rankings, various majors, one thing and another over here, and then we have, great jobs over here, and they weren't meshing. And we said, that's a story. So we really did, a lot of work, a lot of research, interviews, stories, eventually turned it into data projects and into convening, which I think is the role we can play, is to try to bring people together. So we will continue to do that, and we're very happy that we were able to play a role in moving this forward. So thank you for the question, Ron. Appreciate it. I fed that to Ron. He was going to go.
Go ahead.
I was going to key up you guys because I wasn't sure I understood the question.
Well, I would say that the three of us were a very odd choice to be together. We were. We didn't come to this with like minds necessarily, and I think I think that was an enormous power. I think when you're talking about champions, you're not always talking about agreement. You're not always talking about rowing in the same direction. I think the opportunity to be together as a team and have our different perspectives join at a time when we could, because of the Gates Foundation, could make some difference, and it was important. But I also want to mention the same thing applied to the states. And there are names that have gone unsaid. Mm-hmm. In every one of the states, as we created those networks, we asked somebody to manage that. Right. And those champions, Margaret Ashita in New York, and Carl Rectanis in North Carolina, and Stephanie Couch in California, and I can't remember who was in Washington State. Carolyn Landau in Washington State, and who was in Ohio as well was Rich Rosen.
Pretty much Rich, yeah.
It was Rich Rosen who managed that. But for them, I don't know that we're here today. I really don't. Yeah. And I think when we have to take that seriously, because when we move ahead, the champions that we have before us will spawn new ones, and we have to have space for them.
You need a Hall of Fame.
We do.
You want to go?
Yeah, I'm still not sure I understood the question. but like, well, yeah.
You know, moving ahead, what are we, what are thinking on our reflection?
Well, let's see. Yeah, having a champion is a good thing. It just feels. No, I'm going to start spinning if I do. And this is telling us we have like a minute and a half.
Okay, I'll take this. Okay, so when we started, and I had this notion that we could build these networks off of true network theory, because there is one, and that it would work for this, and it could work. Wasn't positive, but believed in it. And it was when I went to Dave in his office, and he was running our work, and we're doing a lot of work in Ohio, and I said, Dave, we need to do STEM in Ohio. If you asked me back then in like 2007, maybe, and then you go forward a couple years where we did a whole national strategic plan for STEM, we just believed in the idea that if you started, if you built it, people would come. I mean, it really does say a lot about that. And we just had a belief in the idea that people would respond to it, and so if you asked me then, did I think we'd have something like this today? I'd say, yeah, you're the vision we had way back in 2008, that there would be these STEM ecosystems all over the country. I don't care whether they're called networks or ecosystems. And Jan told me we've changed the name. I said, great, if that's what it wants to be, that sounds great to me. It wasn't the name, it's the work that you all do, and that there would be so many people across the country doing this work and spreading and expanding and seeing all those new ecosystems. I'd say, yeah, that's what we were envisioning. And you made that happen, so I'm very grateful to all of you who are doing this every day and have bought into this idea and are fighting for this every day.
All right, well, thank you. Please give a round of applause to the three people who've had a big impact